It's dignifying to ask them to pay for the water because immediately upon payment for service, we work for them. And so the expectation, I'll go to homes and ask, like, thank you for being our customer. How's things going? And they're like, well, the water was off like 2 weeks ago all day. Or I couldn't top up my meter. I couldn't top up my meter all day. And I'm there with a staff person, and I'm like, hey, what happened? And they're like, well, the national cell phone grid was down. And the guy's like, well, you guys should have a solution for that. And it's like, okay, I appreciate feedback, but it's so different from like when I was doing charitable work or working, in the NGO model where it's like everyone does the song and dance and they like come out and, beat the drums and all this. But, there's no real dignity there's no reciprocity that's happening there. And, I think we used to shoot for the goal of sitting equal across the table from one another. But when you work for somebody, you actually are lower than them because you require their purchasing for your own survival.
Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of Prosper, the podcast of the Sioka Center, the Entrepreneurship Center at the Bush School of Business. We're the place where innovation meets personal vocation. I'm your host, Andreas Widmer, joined as always by my colleague, Sioka Center Executive Director, Rebecca Teti. Rebecca, I can't believe it. We're already starting season 4.
I can't believe that either. That seems crazy, especially on our extremely high budget, high tech version of this podcast, right? But it's been such a pleasure. It's always a pleasure working with you, Andreas, and we've met so many very cool people along the way.
Yep.
And we're starting with a bang in this season 4 by introducing everybody to Matt Hangen of Water4, and I can't wait to introduce him to everybody.
So let me tell you a little about Matt Hangen. I actually met him at Acton University this past June, and we just, both Rebecca and I, said he has to come and be on this podcast. Anyway, he's a missionary, philosopher, an entrepreneur. He has been working to tackle problems of poverty in Africa since 2008. Is when he started working with Water4, so that's water with the number 4, in 2010 while living in and starting water business in Africa. In 2017, as the CEO, Matt led Water4 through a strategic and scale transition that sets a new vision for piped water in rural Africa. We'll explain this in a minute. His company basically has installed more than 18,000 water projects that serve around 2.73 million people through 6 businesses. And they have created about 1,500 ongoing jobs in those communities and launched over 38,000 discipleship groups.
And the Water4 model, which we're going to tell you about in more detail in section 2, really appealed to both Andreas and me, along with Matt's story. So let's just bring Matt on board. Matt Hangen, welcome to Prosper.
Glad to be here.
I'm going to start you off with a warm-up question that we always ask every guest, which is just, what's the best thing you're reading right now?
Ooh, best thing I'm reading right now. I'm actually reading, it's my first Paul Tillich book. And it's The Courage to Be. Is that the title of it?
Yeah.
That sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
whatever it is, it's a difficult book.
Yeah, totally.
Exactly.
And it was like, I thought it was recommended to me by like one of my friends, and then I got it, and then I texted him and said, man, this is really interesting and deep. And he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so it's one of these things too. I'm like, who told me to read this? But yeah, that's currently Julian of Norwich and Paul Tillich. Those are my 2 reads right now.
So you just take on the light reading.
A little light reading.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Love it.
Tell us a little bit about who you, I gave a very high level explanation of who you are, but tell us a little bit who Matt is and how Matt suddenly came to be and work in Africa. It's all a bit far-fetched, isn't it?
Very. I think like a messed up kid from rural Alabama, is who I am. I grew up in a small rural town on the border of Mississippi. Really wasn't, the kid you would have looked at and thought was going to lead anything or build anything. Couldn't keep myself together, and got kicked out of public school when I was 12. And my grandfather, who had very low, modest income, had passed away on my mom's side and left a life insurance policy that was small, but it was enough in that moment for my parents to put me in a Christian private school. And it was, it took 5 years, but it was, the constant drip of the gospel and Christian families and concepts of virtue that worked upon me. And in my senior year, I had like an audible encounter with God that 180 degree flipped my life in an evening, and experienced dramatic change in my heart and life. It wasn't, an unchurched kid who had no background in all this, just had a massive experience, and said yes to that. And that resulted in, instead of kind of being hostile towards what I thought was a hostile world, to trying to serve a world that I realized was founded in love instead of hostility. And that's what led me to Africa eventually, was just saying yes to opportunities to serve. And that involves some like international missions trips where framing houses and doing cafeteria buildings at schools and electrical work, could kind of go and do hands-on work. And then I got asked to teach because I was in a theology degree. And then it went from like this sort of mix of teaching people practical hands-on skills and teaching theology at the same time, which is what evolved into our current organization and story. But messed up kids, overweight, emotionally dysfunctional, got myself kicked out of school when you're supposed to be, not getting kicked out of school. At 12 is, it's like you get, it's like a gold medal, trouble, usually pretty patient with 12-year-olds. And then, God just had other plans for my life, and he's used sort of my disruptive, nature to focus on something that needed disruptive, that could, result in good and unlock resources, and at the same time continue to refine me as I've grown closer to and sought wisdom in my journey.
That's such a beautiful story, and so typical of the way God works, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious about, because you did the building skills and the electrical knowledge, was that like a field that you were entering and therefore you could bring it to the mission trip, or you learned it on the mission trips?
No, like we were a redneck. Like you don't hire anybody to do anything. So you got a big table full of steel and automotive parts that you MacGyver into, a solution. And, we built houses and barns and did roofing and plumbing and electrical. And the men that were, I was working for and with, had at some point, I'm sure, had formal training or had apprenticed under someone, and I was just sort of informally apprenticing under them. And there was a second nature quality I knew how to weld, I knew how to do basic, electrical and plumbing, and that was enough. I had been taught by people, who measured twice and cut once, to a degree that was really helpful for those that needed to learn those skills in Africa, who hadn't had an apprenticeship under someone who, had mastery. My dad would say I'm terrible at all these things, but I was better than,
Yeah, that makes all the difference. All you have to be.
Yeah.
But it's I can't quite understand. So on the one hand, you said you did apprentice in a sense in the trades like that, but then you also said that you were studied in theology.
Yeah, so this is like, it's very different from Europe and America. Like you just we're just doing these things without having to have, a specialty in it. And so my apprenticeship was, starting when I was old enough to swing a hammer, going and doing this work with family members. And so, my dad had been a home framer before he was an industrial equipment salesman, and I worked in machine shops, but it was, just sort of on the job training.
But then school-wise, after your conversion, like intentional, then you went on to study theology?
Yeah, I studied theology and got a master's degree, an undergraduate degree in New Testament theology, and really thought I'd be a teacher. Like I thought I would kind of abandon all this, redneckery, and just be an academic. And then I got to Africa, and everyone's like, yeah, this is really interesting. Could you teach us how to make some money? Like we don't, And so I just accidentally would work on motorcycles. I'd be in a community and I would sit down and pull a carburetor. I could just tell, what the basic problems were. And so people were like, can you teach us how to do that stuff? And do you know anything about solar, which is really simple? And, could you do this and that? And so when I got into well drilling, built my own well drilling equipment out of materials from a scrap yard, cast our own pulleys, made our own ropes. And it was just sort of like, this is what you do. You go to the big table full of scrap metal behind your barn and you put stuff together and solve the problem. And so there was, I think, a real benefit to growing up in a context of scarcity, because I was in a context of scarcity and your instinct isn't to order something or buy something or, hire an engineer. It's to build the best version of it you can conceive, try it out, improve it, and try to get it done.
Why do you think, I think it's interesting that a guy from Louisiana is going to Africa and telling them how to use the stuff in their backyard to put together, which is the backyard there is probably very similar to yours. It makes, I'm trying to make the connection in my mind that you may have also grown up in poverty in a sense, but you had access to this, what we call networks of productivity and exchange. There was a network of knowledge around you that actually could give you this even informal apprenticeship to show you innovation and how to be like this. And you brought that with you into your mission activity.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bunch of guys in overalls with dip in their mouth, but yeah. I mean, it was still like I always had a job, it was like, and I always wanted to be around these men who were doing stuff. And so, it was my granddad, my uncles, my dad, any neighbor that was doing any building. My dad would drop me off. He'd go and say, hey, can my son help you do your roofing job? He wants to earn some extra money. And so I had like incrementally acquired all these little skills by trying to take whatever job was available to me. And then that became a, context framework for solving problems, in Africa.
That's beautiful. Let me briefly interject here. This is such a beautiful and also cool story. But we're going to come back for more of our conversation with Matt Hangen of Water4. Friends, thank you for supporting us all the way to season 4. And if you're enjoying this episode, please express that by subscribing and making sure that you never miss another episode. And also maybe you could leave us a great review, because it really does help. And you can also leave a comment or a question or a suggestion for a future episode, because we really love to hear from our listeners. And we are entirely donor funded, so we rely on your support. And we would love to see you on campus on October 17th for the fall meeting of our Family Business Consortium. And here's a little word about that. Did you know that family businesses account for 2/3 of America's GDP and are responsible for creating 6 in 10 jobs in the United States? That's right. Family enterprises like yours are the backbone of our economy, the heart of our communities, and the keepers of legacies that span generations. At the Family Business Consortium, we've created a community of peers who truly get it. They've sat in your chair, faced similar decisions, and found ways to thrive while keeping family at the core of their success. We host 2 free full-day seminars annually, available both in person on our gorgeous campus in Washington, D.C., and online. Our next gathering is Friday, October 17th. Find out more in the show notes to the podcast or at familybusinessconsortium.org. That's familybusinessconsortium.org. Our mission is simple: to help generations of family businesses like yours.
Welcome back to Prosper, everybody. If you're just joining us, we're speaking today with Matt Hangen of Water4. Matt just told us a bit about your background and everything, but I'm fascinated about what you did and what you're doing with Water4. Can you explain it a little bit? Let's jump forward now in the story and saying you started Water4. What does it do and what's the business model?
Yeah, so as a nonprofit, we use donations as seed capital into businesses that we wholly own in Africa. And those businesses drill, install, and maintain piped water utilities in rural communities. So the water is sold to those customers in those rural communities at homes and huts, and then the capital from the sales comes back to cover operations and maintenance but we also use it to service debt capital. So we actually use investment leverage against those sales to help us go beyond the donated infrastructure to expansion infrastructure that's powered through business activities.
So just double click on the transfer of the philanthropy to the actual investment where somebody actually owns it afterwards. So would you call that what venture philanthropy, or do you have a term for that?
Well, I mean, the capital infrastructure is owned by the business that we wholly own as a nonprofit, so the equity is held by the nonprofit itself. So I always like to clarify that to people. But yeah, it's the transfer of the donations essentially act as friends and family money, into these businesses that help get the flywheel spinning, and then they accelerate under their own power. That's not our long-term vision. Our long-term vision is actually to make, to have fully investable businesses within the next 5 years, where we can just use, debt capital like a water bond to do start to finish. But we're de-risking markets. We're doing a thing that hasn't been done before. Our demographics are small communities, typically around 2,000 people. There's a lot of aspects of what we're doing that are so unproven that to go to an investor right now and say, we're raising $60 million. Would you invest in this, water utility in rural Africa and in these 4 countries? Pretty, unappetizing, Well,
it's not going to happen. It's I don't know whether I told you, Matt, but a couple of friends and I had a senior collateral lender in Africa, where we raised money and then went to invest, and we looked for more, and that's what triggers this whole thing to come back is when you say de-risking capital in Africa. I can tell you it was very difficult to raise money for it, because even though we would give above average return, Africa with any money is in a risk category that unless you return over 30% of revenue, people are just not, the risk model is so different. And so what I always felt, and what I feel you found, is the best term I can find is subprime. Like, you found a subprime market that is actually reducing the risk. And I want you to go into that, why the risk gets reduced. You find a way to reduce the risk of the money being lost or like lose itself in the sand, if you wish. Can you double click on that? Because I think that is de-risking Africa is like the word we need to all focus on.
Yeah.
Because we're just looking at Africa as one big bunch of an investment. That's not true.
Yeah.
We need to segment this out.
Well, I think with water, like water utilities are one of the best long-term investments you can make, because people always, it's inelastic. People use it every day. And so in the customers are going to use a consistent volume over, every day of the year. And so, if you look at equity valuations on water companies, it's usually 16 years, because, it's such a, stable, viable business model to invest in. In Africa, what we're doing is we're doing the core infrastructure in the first 50 homes with donations, and then we're using debt financing to connect an additional 200 homes to a functioning asset, already pumping water, already with proven water sales in that community. And so we just finance the pipeline to home portion with debt financing, and then can begin repaying capital immediately. And so we're showing our capacity to service debt, and we're spreading that out across multiple markets, so that we can come back and say, we've raised, right now around $10 million in debt financing. We're deploying that. We're paying it back. Next year, we should have around $5 million in water sales, about $15 million in donations. And so we begin to sort of model this capacity to generate the revenue, deploy and repay the debt capital, and show that rural markets, which are considered, very subprime or, unappealing, are actually an overlooked market ready for disruptive innovation, a la the innovator's dilemma, Clayton Christensen.
Yeah, it's you're at that fortune of the bottom of the pyramid beginning. Say a little bit, if you would, Matt, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, and you can correct me if I am, that this was not originally the model for Water4, right? And so tell us a little bit about how you made this transition and why, because I think this is a really dynamic part of the story too.
Yeah, I mean, we were founded with the idea that half the planet lacks access to water they can drink at their homes, and there's only 25% of the resources between governments and charities combined to address the current problem. and over half of the water projects are broken. And so you've got a quarter of the funding and half of what's funded is broken within 12 months of installation. So we just knew there was a big problem. So we started out thinking that we could start and scale small locally owned businesses that would do low cost boreholes with hand pumps. So it's like a well in the center of a village with a hand pump on it, stuff you're used to seeing. And we thought if we lowered that price from $10,000 to $1,500 or $2,000, we could get the community to self-finance it, not requiring donations. So we would train the business up, saturate the market with operators, which would create competition, lower the cost. We'd buy in bulk, create competitive supply chains that had competitive pricing, and go out and try to get communities to buy their own borehole instead of having to have it donated. Well, that was a great idea in theory, except for the people who didn't want to buy it. And so we had all this sort of thinking and rigor and a business model behind it, and we created our own pump that was low cost. It could be maintained by people without specialty tools. It was PVC and non-corruptible or non-corrosive. And we'd done all this, design thinking, and then we got out and people said, we don't want to pay for it. And we're like, you can pay for it. Why wouldn't you pay for it? You got 700 people, $2,000. This is affordable. Why won't you do it? And we kept asking people, like, what would you pay for? What would you pay for? What would you pay for? And we're standing out in these like huts and villages, and all the ladies are like piped water. And we're like, that feels very far away from where we are right now. Like it wasn't like a better hand pump. It wasn't a faster horse. They were like, we want piped water. And so like this, picture behind me, and that led us to ask, like, well, what are you currently spending your money on? Maybe we don't understand what people's incomes are. And so we did income surveys, which revealed that people were paying others to haul water to their house for $5 to $6 a month on motorcycles, tricycles, by hand, et cetera. And that was sort of our big revelation. It's like, oh, there's a paid water market that's here, and people aren't buying water, they're buying transportation or conveyance of water because it's heavy and time consuming. 3 hours a day, every woman and girl spends 70,000 hours of their life or 8 years hauling water. So people are willing to pay to get that time back because the time equals productive upside, opportunity. And so we as basically simple-minded engineers were like, well, how many people over what area would it take to make a business model work to deliver water for $5 to $6 a month? And then with what technology? And we were already building drilling equipment, already drilling wells, already installing pumps. So it was like, well, we need a vertically integrated company, compress all the costs. So we're going to manufacture our buildings and drill and install our own wells and pumps, do our own pipeline, do our own sales and revenue collection. So you don't have to pay margins to contractors as you do each of those steps because you're doing it in-house. You control the quality, which means the O&M costs are known variables and are fixed. And then it was like, we need 100,000 people in a catchment area of about 50 kilometers because that's how far you can drive in a day and do service with this many employees, with this type of tech. And boom, we had at the time a one-tab business model and a big idea, and made a big transition to delivering this branded piped water that we call Numa to the home with prepaid meters, all through local staff.
And so you also you lay the pipes and the whole thing, and you maintain it. That's what the 50 kilometers is, like so that you can actually service it and everything.
Yeah, there's like a serviceable range. We needed traditional water charities do like ad hoc responses. They do a well in this village and a well in this village, and they turn it over to the community, and they call it community management. Which is Tragedy of the Commons Incorporated, it's like this thing breaks, and then people use it unequally. It's an unequal distance from the homes, and then like some 23-year-old got given a toolbox and shown how to do it, 13 months earlier, and now he's terrified of pulling the pump apart because it could make it worse trying to fix it, and then NGOs are like, well, we'll take care of it, we'll come fix it, but then it takes them 3 months to come back, and in 3 months they're back drinking at the river, and so there's just all these sort of issues where it was like, why are we giving people in Africa this Stone Age technology, and like, why are we assuming that their incomes are static and not dynamic, and
not make them a part of the solution, right?
Yeah.
Doing what's so brilliant, and do go further into that. So that company then, how does that work, and how is that owned, and how does that generate the revenue then? Because the $6, what's so beautiful is that you do a classic entrepreneurship and market analysis to say they're spending $6 a month on this. So this is not new spending. I know, we always, Rebecca and I tell in our class, we need to find customers who are willing and able to pay, right? So these people are willing and able because they're paying this already. You're not telling them to take extra budget to do this. And that's a classic innovation to go into a market. Tell us a bit about how this works then with the ownership of the company and the sustainability.
Yeah, so the company is, because we're taking donations, the company's owned by the nonprofit, so the assets are still owned by the nonprofit as a company ownership rolls up into us. And so that's because, at this stage in the game, we're using donations to fund it. And so we don't want somebody mismanaging it or selling equity to someone else in the communities that are intended to be helped, not helped. Now, the model should be a vaccine creation type idea that can be used and replicated and copied by private individuals with private equity. And that's a part of our big goal, is to prove that is possible, because in Africa alone, there'll be 1 billion rural people by 2050 that need this service, and you're going to need multiple players that are doing things like us to reach that many people. The revenue is the real backbone of what we do is by using prepaid meters, because the cost to collect is what makes a lot of these water utilities fail. It's because they constantly are dealing with receivables from their customers, and you don't want to have to go turn a water meter off, and you don't want to have to go chase a customer down to collect $2 or $3 a month, because the cost to collect is as high as the water bill itself. So we use an inexpensive prepaid meter, and the customer text we're using mobile money, the business automatically through the meter tech texts back a 10-digit code when that revenue is received, and the customer enters it into a small little RF remote that puts that volume of water back on the meter, and then it just keeps flowing. So it's like, electricity in a lot of countries has gone to this way. It's like prepaid, inexpensive meter technology.
Where did you get that technology?
It's a company out of China called Liaison. And we started using it in our retail water kiosk first, tested it. We were getting 6 to 7 years of life, and then we went to our home use. And the customer actually pays for the cost of the meter and cost of the tap, which is around $100. They put that deposit down, which also de-risks the investment. The total cost to get it to a home is around $400, $425. The customer, by buying the meter and buying the tap, also de-risks the business and the investment, because that sunk cost is, already partially paid by the customer.
It's so cool. Something that you said at an Acton this summer that really touched my heart was, I think you made the distinction between how it is to interact with people as clients versus as customers, and why. Because sometimes in the West, as you're talking about, simple engineers, and we thought we had the solution. And why might it be, in a way, more respectful of someone's dignity for them to be a customer rather than just the recipient of your largesse?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of, it's like, no, you like sit here, you stay seated, I'll hand you this like, bag of stuff that you didn't ask for, out of my kindness and generosity. And one of the things I mentioned at Acton is, like, you see this message of the gospel is like, get up and take your mat. There's this like involvement and participation in your own development and healing. And, it's dignifying to ask them to pay for the water, because immediately upon payment for service, we work for them. And so the expectation, I'll go to homes and ask, like, thank you for being our customer. How's things going? And they're like, well, the water was off like 2 weeks ago all day. Or I couldn't top up my meter. I couldn't top up my meter all day. And I'm there with a staff person, and I'm like, hey, what happened? And they're like, well, the national cell phone grid was down. And the guy's like, well, you guys should have a solution for that. And it's like, okay, I appreciate feedback, but it's so different from like when I was doing charitable work or working, in the NGO model, where it's like everyone does the song and dance, and they like come out and, beat the drums and all this. But, there's no real dignity there's no reciprocity that's happening there. And, I think we used to shoot for the goal of sitting equal across the table from one another. But when you work for somebody, you actually are lower than them, because you require their purchasing for your own survival.
It's the question of the win-win situation. And yeah, you can say charity has the win-win in terms of it makes me feel good and the other person gets something. but the win-win in terms of excellence, that includes excellence. And so to demand that you figure out the thing with the cell phones is actually not a bad pressure.
Yeah.
Because it keeps you on your toes.
We couldn't figure out what worked if we weren't asking people to pay for it. We just kept making better hand pumps. And it wasn't until we asked people, what would you pay for, what would you pay for, what would you pay for? And the assumption is, if they'll cover the cost, we've solved the problem and done so efficiently. And so it was like a virtuous idea that, rendering payment for service would actually help us solve people's problems, because people are already solving their problems in some way. You're not the unique genius that's solving some problem. People are doing it. So the challenge for all of us in trying to do good is, can we do a better job at a more efficient cost structure to solve problems that people are already.
So you've been involved in Africa for well over 20 years now, no?
Yeah, 20 years to the year.
So I wonder, of course, you're full-time, you're focusing on the water and everything, but hasn't it crossed your mind to apply your insight into some other industries or areas?
Yes. The biggest thing is, this is recorded, so I should be careful, but I'm like, international development, I'm like, isn't that just business everywhere else where people aren't poor? Like, why are we, it seems like we domestic development for all the countries that are supporting international development was just business. We came in and the solving people's problems created technological and economic and societal development. And so I think we just overcomplicate it with all the committees and the steering groups and the working sessions and the agendas for change and all this sort of stuff that's going on. It's like, just go in and figure out how people are solving a problem, provide a better version of it, charge them for it. I think donations for development as seed capital are a great use of them. What's the plan to use it to get a problem, de-risk, and then switch to investment with it? But yeah, it's power, food, there's a lot of sectors where this type of, Occam's razor thinking could really be beneficial.
It's so beautiful, and I'm going back now to something you said a few minutes ago, but especially the empowerment of women, because of as you say, the hours and hours and hours of their lives that are spent not working in a business where they could make any money, not getting an education because they're just walking to the well and hauling water. And so it gives me chills up my spine thinking about just the unleashing of human potential from what you're doing here.
Yeah, 70,000 hours, 7 PhDs is tied up, doing the work that a donkey should do, just hauling heavy 50-pound buckets of water back and forth to your home. And I think it changes the way the women and girls see themselves too, because it's like, I'm not an instrument of toil anymore, but I'm an agent of my own potential. And those girls can go to school regularly, and then just waking up in the morning and not having your husband elbow you to go haul the 300 pounds of water that day. It's. I think my wife gets upset when I don't make the coffee first, but I can't imagine telling her to go start hauling water at 4 a.m.
Where are you active? What's the geographic coverage by now?
So Sierra Leone, Ghana, Uganda, and Zambia. And Ghana's our biggest operation. We work in the southwest and then northeast and northwest.
Mm-hmm. So all the way, so Cape Coast up north, and then below the capital again, below Accra.
So Takoradi would be the sort of major city you would think of on the southwest, and then Wa would be the upper west side, and then this Bolgatanga, Zabilla on the northeast.
Are there areas where you are planning to go, and are there areas where you can't go?
We want to expand into all the adjacent markets where we currently are at, and so we can move up and out. It's just more people know the brand, they've seen it, their parents have it if they don't have it. And so we're surrounding major cities because we don't have access to cities because of national regulations right now. But our hope is sort of like the walls of Jericho. Like all villages around these major cities have it, and then we'll get let into major markets where the cost efficiencies will be better. So we want to expand. I think Ghana has like 50 million rural people, and so there's just a tremendous amount of market availability and God alone. But we want to do it well and do it right where we're at, prove that it's possible, repay the capital, and then go to where free markets, free market approaches to water are possible within legal frameworks of the countries. So you have to have a decentralized government, typically that gives the municipality enough autonomy to allow a private water provider to come in, and then set a tariff based on the cost of the like black market water, of having people deliver it on a cash basis, as compared to the politicized water tariff, which is typically about half of what the actual cost is. So government water policy will say water can be sold at 1 cent per 5 gallons, but that water that is sold at 1 cent for 5 gallons works 1 day a week for a few hours and isn't safe to drink, because the companies, the parastatal companies, aren't covering their operating costs. There's a disincentive to actually invest in it because the tariff's too low, because it's a politicized tariff. So we have to have partnerships with municipalities to charge this cost that's within the market, but that cost is what we need to operate and to repay investment capital. So it has to be a pro-free market country. So the more, what's the polite way to say this? The less free market it is, the less likely we are to work there.
But what you're saying is that the local city government or the local government, in a sense, has to collaborate with you.
Absolutely.
And make this possible, because there are blanket rules in place. Water is a basic human necessity, but those rules, and I've seen this myself, those rules sometimes put water and the quality at a level that is below consumption, and you're trying to go above, which means you need some flexibility by the government to allow you to do what you're doing.
Yep, it's you end up providing a water solution for the lowest common denominator, based on those policy decisions. So we say, we'll take the risk. We have 50% of homes in these communities where people earn $1 a day have a tap at their house. And no one would have ever foreseen that level of market penetration. People thought 10 to 15%, because people have to pay $100 for the tap, and then they have to pay for the ongoing use of the water, which is around $1.20 per 1,000 liters. And people are like, that's unaffordable. What they didn't think of is like the economic upside of purchasing that water. Everyone's income went up when they got the time back per day. And so we had this massive, market saturation. And if you don't have it at your house, your neighbor does. You just walk next door and buy it, because it's 50% of the homes. And so
this reminds me so much. Your attitude, your thinking is like what Grameen phone, what Iqbal Kadir had in terms of cell phones, because he said, yes, a cell phone maybe, we can't somebody can't pay the whole cell phone at a time when they live in a slum, but he compared it. He says the cell phone for them in Bangladesh is the same as a car is for us in the United States. That without a car you can't have a job, and without a job you can't have a car. Therefore, if I lease you or I lease you the car, you can get the car and then get a job, and then you're able to pay. Your mechanism is very similar. If you free up 5-6 hours a day of logging water around, that productivity is going to go up. That ties into the same thing. I keep going back to say, think of poverty, think in terms of poverty, in terms of networks of productivity and exchange. And what you're doing here is you're increasing productivity, and by creating a different form of exchange, and that is every time is going to pay off.
Yes. We didn't think about how water is an input into about everything you make for productivity too. It's whether it's a vegetable, whether it's brick making, whether it's laundry washing, beer production. We've got a beer producer who makes his own beer by the thousands of gallons, to hair salons, to cafeterias, restaurants. Water's an input in all those things. And it's unequivocally cheaper to have it conveyed in a pipe and treated and buy it than to have it conveyed in any other manner. And humans just can't haul enough on their own for drinking and for their business. And so when it's piped, suddenly all these taps were being transformed into cottage industries at all the homes. And so they were generating more income, where suddenly a person can produce 10 times more mud bricks even than they used to, because they don't have to haul the water from the lake. It's right at their house, which, increases their income, typically lowers the price of the commodity in the community, and has all these other positive economic effects.
This is so super interesting, Matt. It's a privilege to hear you, and like, if I bring you into one of my classrooms, students are going to think we fed you the lines. This is exactly the kind of stuff that we're talking about, and we can vouch that we met each other once.
That's right. I'll prove that. I'll send the emails. I only got one sentence, so I'm coming in blind.
No, it's beautiful. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for your time with us. This is just an amazing story, and I think it's you're a real blessing for us to hear and for those people.
Well, thank you for your work, and just believe in the power of free markets. I'd say that to your students. Like, it's got a bad rap, but individuals, the aggregate of individuals making choices in their own pursuit of the good creates positive change in the world. And so you got to trust in the power of the markets, and I think it's the greatest solution that we could have brought to help people move from poverty to prosperity.
It's so beautiful. Before we go, though, Matt, how can people get in touch with you or get in touch with Water4?
Yes, so our website is water4.org. Simple email is info@water4.org. We don't do social media very well, probably because I don't do it very well. I'm on LinkedIn. That's the one platform that I'm occasionally on, so you can find me on LinkedIn at Matt Hangen, CEO of Water4. But we do have Instagram and Facebook and those other social platforms. But follow us and shoot an email, and I'll be sure to get back to you, especially if you're interested in applying this type of theory to the work that you're a part of.
That's terrific. And as always, you'll find every resource that we've mentioned today linked in the show notes. So we'll connect everybody up, and I hope you get some good publicity out of this, because it's such a beautiful, beautiful story.
This was a great start to the 4th season, everybody. But that's all the time we have today, friends. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Matt, in particular. We're grateful for all of your support. Until next time, we hope you prosper.